I guess if I say, what is physical health, what would you tell me? It's where a part of your body aches, a part of your body is not functioning, and you get a lot of distress from it through pain or discomfort. It's very similar. Mental health is your emotions, it's your heart, it's your feelings, it's the way you feel about yourself, it's the way you see yourself, that it's painful and it hurts. It also hurts physically. When we are struggling with mental health, we have quite a lot of pain. Our heart aches, our stomach, kind of butterflies in our stomach. Our heart starts palpitating very quickly when we're scared. So there's a lot of physical sensations. Of course, people often interpret that as a physical concern, but depression is a mental health. Anxiety is a mental health issue. Just not feeling good about yourself is a mental health issue, but it's not a disease, it's just a discomfort. I always call it psychological distress. So we have physical distress, physical ill health, and we have mental ill health. Of course, we have severe disorders, both physically and mentally, but we're talking about, normal day-to-day emotions. I'd be surprised if somebody said to me, I've never experienced anxiety. I'd be worried, actually, if somebody said, I've not experienced anxiety. I'd be concerned if somebody said, I've never had low mood, but I'm not surprised that they're not spoken about. So mental health isn't just, take medication and you'll be okay. It's about changing yourself. It's changing the way you see things, changing your style of thinking. That we as children, we look up to our parents. We learn through experiences, we learn through modeling. If I see this is how my parents are dealing with distress, am I learning how to deal with distress? So if you're supporting a mother to manage distress differently, you're actually supporting a system here. You're allowing a mother to be mentally well to look after a child. And not just mental health, that when you're supporting a mother to become independent, then you're teaching a child that you can manage atrocities. So you're not just interfering with one member of the family when you're kind of giving that sort of support. You're actually changing a system. Well, if I was to start with depression, isolation, you're not going to go into the community, you're not going to make a difference in that community, you're just going to isolate yourself. You're not going to feel great about yourself. You're not going to go to those exams. You're not going to try and apply to university. So there is that. There's also the idea that if you're constantly anxious about being judged, then you're not going to be spontaneous and trying to be creative and go out there and do things and build things and do things. You're constantly worried about that kind of sense of being judged. If we're thinking about somebody who's constantly worried and anxious, the level of distress they're in, the impact that has on their health, there's a system that gets impacted if a mother is depressed. And I know a lot of people out there can relate to this statement. If your mother's distressed, she's not emotionally available. And what do you do with those emotions as a child growing up? What do you learn to express your emotions because no one's held you and contained you and allowed you to talk about emotions? Do we talk about emotions? Do I come in and say, I'm feeling distressed today, I was emotionally hurt? We don't say that. Get a grip. Go and do 2 rak'ats of prayers, you should be fine. That's fantastic, that's absolutely fine, but we cannot dismiss mental health issues. So, you've got a system of community with low self-esteem, with lack of belief in self, with the inability to take risks and be creative. What are you building? A society of anxious individuals who are constantly repeating their wudu or constantly repeating their prayers because they think they didn't do it properly, and then or constantly worried about their thoughts, thinking their thoughts is going to come true if I thought about that. The amount of time I've had people saying, I have these images of my son being knocked down by a car or something, and then she goes and checks on the son at school, or I have this thoughts of what if something's happened to my husband, and they panic if he doesn't pick up the phone. So there's you're so wrapped up by unhealthy thoughts that you lose ability to be creative, to be spiritual as well. How could you be spiritual if you're constantly in that level of anxiety, and if you're not feeling great about yourself? How could anyone be spiritual when they hate themselves and think they're not good enough or they're failures? So there is improvement in every area when you work with mental health. So it's really giving someone also hope. I can change my life, I can do things. And we know with experience, you do it for 2 months, then you do it for 6 months, then you're already 1 year experience. And where does that take you? It takes you to a different step, because the more we start with something small, we become experienced in that small thing, then we go for something harder, bigger, and then we become experienced there as well. And that's where we can, improve our lives. Having a good sense of self allows you to be creative, it allows you to go to work, allows you to study, allows you to problem solve. We know when we're depressed, we lose the ability to problem solve. But when you're mentally in a better place, then you're able to see things from a different perspective. Then you can have an alternative view of things, you become more creative. So, you end up sort of having lots of creativity and people actually wanting to do things. But when you're depressed, you're anxious, you constantly want to hide yourself and avoid being out there. I mean, this is the basic I can say. It also improves the economy, improves the system, creates positive future, because you have healthier young people growing up to become healthier adults and healthier parents. But we end up having a depressed child, a depressed mother, a depressed child. This depressed child becomes a depressed adult, gets married and becomes a depressed father, and brings up depressed children. And how could a society build itself when you're constantly dealing with, if you were to think about it, it distracts you from becoming something, because you're so wrapped up with all these negative emotions that you have no room to be creative. And when I talk about creativity, I'm not talking about painting a wall. Being creative about, what do I do with my life? How do I manage my day today? What do I do with this problem I have? Okay, how do I get from A to Z? That's creativity. When you're depressed, you lose all that. You can't even problem solve.